very, very practical message. Not very theological, not too deep with many points. Something very practical. I'm going to be talking about a man who fell asleep in church. And from time to time, I see a lot of people sleeping in church. And if you watch me very carefully, you will hear that I'm banging at some times, just hoping they will get the message, or raising my voice, because I don't want to really embarrass anybody. Because there are various reasons why some people sleep. And we also need to make some room for that. But no snoring, please. My scripture reading this morning is from the Gospel of the great book of Acts. Some Acts of some apostles. Acts 20, and we'll read together from verses 6 to 12. Talking about the man who fell asleep in church. So please stay awake with me, everybody. Starting from verse 6 of chapter 20. And we sailed from Philippi after the days of the unleavened bread, and came to them at Troas within 5 days. And there we stayed 7 days. And then on the first day of the week, when we gathered together to break bread, Paul began talking to them, intending to depart the next day. And he prolonged his message until midnight. And there were many lamps in the upper room where we were gathered together. And there was a certain young man named Eutychus, sitting on the windowsill, sinking into a deep sleep. And as Paul kept on talking, he was overcome by sleep, and he fell down from the 3rd floor and was picked up dead. Oh Lord. See, that's the reason. If you look at the architecture here, I made sure that the builders don't give any ledge for anybody to fall down. Have you seen that? It was taking this into account. But Paul went down and fell upon him. And after embracing him, he said, "Do not be troubled, for his life is in him." And when he had gone back and had broken the bread and eaten, he talked with them a long while until daybreak. And so he departed. And they took away the boy alive and were greatly comforted. What a great service. I'd like to be in such a service where things like this happen. I mean, people falling down and dying and getting raised from the dead as well. There was this man in church that always fell asleep. And it was really getting to the pastor. And so when he spoke to one of his deacons, and he said to him, you just get this long stick, and every time the man falls off to sleep and snores, just knock him gently on the head. And so the deacon very, very patiently and obediently did what he was told to do. The first time round, the man just dozed off and was about to make a noise. He got a tap on the head, and he shook himself up, looked straight, and in a little while, he fell off to sleep again. And And the deacon again, very, very calmly, took out his stick and gently gave it to him on his head. And he got up, again, shook himself up, and looked up like nothing happened. Well, not long after, the third time, he really went off. And the deacon realized that he needed to put a little bit more pressure on the stick. So when he exercised this pressure on the stick, the man was sit down out of his chair onto the floor. And so the deacon quickly ran up to see if he can resuscitate him. But then he heard the man say, "Oh Lord, hit me again, I can still hear him." So I pray this morning, nobody will ask the Lord to hit you again. You'll just hear the Lord speak to us. Most of the stories people have about falling asleep in awkward situations are simply humorous. There are some situations in which it can be absolutely dangerous, especially when you're driving, for instance. But in our scripture here today, we have a story of a man who fell asleep in church, which we wouldn't normally think of as dangerous. Some of you here do this quite often. But anyway, we find in this story some very important points for discussion this morning. Firstly, we must look at verse 6 and 7. Here, what is presented to us is a very faithful assembly. And what is written is that we sailed from Philippi after the days of the unleavened bread, and came unto them to Troas in 5 days, where we abode there for 7 days, and upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread. And these believers were faithful to gather to worship the Lord on the Lord's Day. And I believe that is the first hallmark of a Christian. We must put everything off on the Lord's Day, because the Lord's Day is the Lord's Day. And therefore we must gather to worship Him on the Lord's Day. And so in this passage, it is obviously not the morning service. It's the evening service. So as Paul would have been preaching from the morning till midnight until next daybreak. No, it's definitely an evening service, because the rest of verse 7 says, Paul preached until midnight. So this wasn't the Sunday morning crowd. This was the Sunday night service. The thing we want to see first is the faithfulness of these people to the Lord's house. Whenever the church met for worship and fellowship, they were there. Hebrews 10 verses 24 and 25 says, "And let us consider one another." Let us consider one another. And you know, when we use this word provoke, we normally use it in the negative sense. He provoked me, and that is why I smacked him. He provoked me, and that is why I said what I said. No, but I'd like you to see this so much so in the positive. And let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works. Very seldom we see this word provoke used in the positive. And so we can provoke people unto love and good works. And then Paul says, not forsaking the assemblings of ourselves together as a man of